rich people, always flying off somewhere.
Welcome to the Vegan Vanguard,
a show about all things from the perspective of two revolutionary vegan women.
I'm Mexi.
And I'm Maureen. And today we'll be talking about universal basic income and what our perspectives on that are.
A critical leftist take on UBI. Yeah, since it's all the rage right now. And Maureen is just back from Athens.
I am back from Athens, and I'm not very happy to be back.
No, she's not in a good mood.
No.
For this recording.
I feel like
I always get that like post-travel depression.
Yeah, it's been, well, also the weather was so nice in Athens, and it was like between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius, and it's so cold here. And Mexi, it actually is cold today. It's like -5, because I always tell Mexi about how cold it is here, and it's always like 30 degrees warmer than it is in Toronto.
Yeah, seriously. Or I'm like, oh, it's so wonderful out today. I had to go outside for a walk. It was 2 degrees and the sun was out.
One time you actually said, oh my God, it was so hot. I had like came inside and like took off all of my sweaters and it was 2 degrees. And I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah. Here when it's like 7 or 8, I'm dying of cold. I also just have terrible resilience to cold, though, you know this, like really bad circulation, and I'm always just freezing.
Yeah, well, usually I do too, but I guess it's been like -30 so often here that I've just been like, when it's 2, I'm like, wow, it's amazing.
-30, wow. It's -3 in Paris today, and it like I could barely walk like 100 meters.
It's 2 degrees, 2 degrees here, and I'm like, wow, the sun is out. I should go for a walk.
Yeah, you told me that whenever it breaks the 0 mark, people are out on runs and stuff.
Oh yeah, people yesterday were like all over the place running and biking and everything. People were biking this morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really is relative. Well, in Athens, it was very nice, though. It was between 15 and 20 degrees every day. I was so happy. And yeah, I had a really nice time. I went there by myself and stayed in a hostel. And yeah, I actually met one of my subscribers, one of my viewers from YouTube.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. So Stephen, if you're listening, hi. It was awesome to meet you in Athens. And they showed me around a good many things that I would not have had access to if I didn't know them. So yeah, that was great. And I just ate lots of yummy vegan food. Basically, I had falafel wraps like every day, like twice a day most of the time.
Nice.
And that was really good. And I hiked up the Acropolis a bunch of times, and I went on a walking tour.
It up there.
And like it was just so fun. So yeah, I am having the post vacation downward spiral. And then, as Mexi knows, I also got in like a mini car accident last night on my way back from the airport. Yeah, it was super scary, but thankfully I'm all good. But so I'm just like, just feeling the feeling today.
Need those self-driving cars, right Uber?
Ooh, good.
Displace all those workers.
Yeah, all those self-driving
Displace that workforce.
Yeah, we got to invest in the technology that's going to make us free.
Yeah. So before we dive in, we have a few Patreon pledges to shout out. So we have Madeline Morgan, thank you so much. Magnus, Jordan, and Brandon Wright. So thank you so much to everyone who's donated in the past several weeks.
Thank you to all of our new patrons. And Patreon pledges. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. So if you want to support the show, once again, you can give us a one-time donation on PayPal on our website, which is veganvanguardpodcast.com, or you can become a monthly Patreon donor.
Nice.
Once again through our website. And yeah, that's how you can support us.
Yep.
All right, so shall we dive in?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take the lead?
All right. So we're gonna start by talking about the reasons why we need UBI in this late stage capitalist system. And then we're going to look at the progressive idea, the reactionary idea, and then, a lot of critiques of that reactionary idea. And then finish it off by discussing what we think about, whether we should support this or whether this will actually solve any of the contradictions of capitalism at all. So, to start off, I'm going to start talking about like the reason that we need UBI under capitalism. So, as we know from like all previous podcasts and my channel and Maureen's channel, capitalism reproduces itself only by creating an ever-growing reserve pool of labor. And by that, I mean people who are either unemployed, underemployed, or employed in the informal economy that is largely superfluous to capital. So it's like an unregulated economy. So there are many ways that it does this as a system, and you can check out my video on this topic specifically, but one would be automation. And automation is a natural part of the growth of capitalism because in order to stay competitive, capitalists must be constantly revolutionizing their production process to make production as cheap as possible so that their profits can continue to rise. Because the lower you keep your costs, including labor costs, the more you profit from your sales. Neoliberalism and free trade have also contributed to this by pitting workers against one another in the global race to the bottom in terms of wages and working conditions. So basically, because capital can move and labor can't, like because we now have these global mechanisms to outsource all of our labor to the third world. If workers strike anywhere in the world, if workers strike in the first world or the third world, then it just encourages companies to either automate more to just displace that labor altogether or to outsource more to sweatshops in the third world. So this keeps wages down globally. That's why we call it the race to the bottom. Yay, capitalism. So we're reaching a point now where automation and the increasing precariousness of labor everywhere is poised. I mean, Maureen, I think can refute this a bit. But yeah, it's estimated that capitalism is poised to make up to 50% of the workforce redundant in the next several decades through automation and through, increasing precariousness. So when people have no jobs, they can't purchase anything. And so the economy flops because you have a problem with effective demand. If there's no one to purchase all of the goods being produced by the system, then we run into the crisis of overaccumulation and then consequent stagnation. So that means that, yeah, there's all these goods, but there's no one to buy them. And so the system stagnates.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why everyone now is kind of looking to UBI, and like even high profile conservative people are now pushing for UBI, because yeah, people are realizing like, well, shit, what are we gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
So like the idea, it could be progressive, it could be otherwise, but basically I feel like the idea was shunned for a long time. Like progressives were picking it up, but it was basically shunned as like this wacky left-wing pipe dream for a long time until recently when some like really high profile Silicon Valley billionaires started to realize that the more that they automated and put people out of work, the fewer people would actually be able to buy their goods.
Mm-hmm.
So now that like Richard Branson and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are behind it, now it's a credible idea. Now it's a talking point.
Mm-hmm. I just read a couple articles this morning that talked about the fact that the narrative that automation is going to fully take over very soon is an idea that's also largely pushed by Silicon Valley and beneficial to them because it basically furthers the narrative that people should invest in technology and that there's this almost utopian technological determinism that we're inevitably going to head towards, that like science and automation is going to triumph and that there's no way to resist this progress. But for example, Marx's criticism of automation would make us seriously question this narrative because he discussed automation as basically a way of disciplining labor and of ridding laborers of like their bargaining power by continually replacing them with automation that could do their own job. So for example, like if there's an engineer, if there's a machinist that can like perform some kind of action, and then you replace that worker with a machine and ask, the worker to instead, take on another job, like sweep the floor or oil this new technology or whatever. Basically, you're continually devaluing the position and decreasing the bargaining power of that worker to contest their wages or to contest their labor conditions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, like, I think we'll talk about this in a bit too. I mean, on the one hand, like Marx was, yeah, clear about that. But on the other, he also felt like, automation played into this like post-scarcity idea of like fully automated luxury communism, which I'm going to talk about shortly. But that, it can be used in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
but under capitalism,
Right.
it would only like degrade the working conditions and wages of labor and degrade their bargaining power.
Right. So maybe like under the social relations of capitalism, automation is just going to be a way to continually like devalue and drive down wages and bargaining power of workers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that automation like outside of those, if it wasn't basically run by the capitalists, like if we have automation that is in the ownership of the capitalists, like there's no way it's going to benefit the workers more than the
Mm-hmm.
capitalists,
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
and it's true that like pushing this whole narrative of technology being inevitable, and like our saving grace, inventing like drones and self-driving cars and creating all this hype around it is like hugely beneficial for the Amazons and the Ubers, and like the Walmarts of the world because they want people to invest in their technology. And it's interesting because I was reading that Amazon, even though like Amazon is absolutely massive, it's actually like a very bad company to invest in. Like the earnings to share price are 200 to 1, where so it's like a pretty crappy investment. Whereas like normally earning to share prices that are considered like valuable are 10 to 1 or 8 to 1. So anyway, it's just a good way to like jack up their stock prices and like make people believe that, since the future is now, this is like the place we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Also, Amazon is like a fucking like, oh, they're the worst company for labor. I just shared
Oh
this
yeah.
article about how they're automating these like Fitbits basically that will be able to let employers know if workers are slacking off at all. Or
What?
like, yeah, I will share this in the show notes. It is like slave labor. Like they're gonna track what workers are doing, and then if they're slacking off, then Amazon will know, and they're creating a
Holy
patent for it.
wow.
Yeah,
That's
seriously,
really
fuck Amazon.
scary. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I read in an article and I talked about this in a video that something like over 25% of workers in the United States like got their Fitbit through their employers, but I had no idea.
Hmm.
So what, are they gonna like track their heart rate to like figure out if they're packing boxes or not?
Girl, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't remember what the article was
Hmm.
saying about exactly how they're gonna do it, but it was like basically it would like track their hand motions so that like they would know if they were like making mistakes and stuff.
Holy
It's
shit.
fucked up. This is
Wow.
some like dystopian nightmare shit. So yeah,
Definitely.
Amazon, get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, it's hard for me to say, like there's so many different, numbers out there. Like, I mean, 50% of the workforce is like probably hyperbolic, but at the same time, I don't know, there are entire industries that are set to be taken
Mm-hmm.
over by robots, and things that you wouldn't even expect, like journalists and like
Mm-hmm.
doctors and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a progressive way that this could be used, but it would not be under the social relations of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like what this like fully automated luxury communism is all about, or like this is what the idea of post-scarcity is all about. Um, because yeah, I mean, under different social relations, like if we were living under like a communal ownership model, communal property, etc., then sure, we could have all of these robots doing literally everything for us in such a way that it would just increase our leisure time, and it would increase like we could just have access to things that we wanted, like whatever the goods that the robots are creating. We would be free from the shackles of wage labor, and we wouldn't have to do all of this just to get by. We would be free to actually pursue what we wanted and what we dreamed of doing and what we were passionate about, what we were good at. Um, and then all the menial tasks that nobody wants to do would be taken over by robots. So this is like the ideal, like futuristic communist society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even like on the progressive side, some people were saying that, it could be done in such a way that people are actually getting paid, quite not quite well, but like they're getting paid so that they're above the poverty line, and that they also have access to social services. So this could be a way to take away some of the control that the employer has over the employee, and then it would liberate them to some degree to be able to pursue their passions, because they again wouldn't be slaves to their wages, or they wouldn't be stuck tied to like one really shitty employer like Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
or like having to have two or three retail jobs or whatever. So this is like the progressive dream.
Right, because I could see that going in the exact opposite direction. Like, I feel like the more the worker is divorced from the employee in terms of, I'm sorry, the more the employee is divorced from the employer for their wage, like, the more also they lose their ability to like have bargaining power. So what I mean is like,
Mm,
for example, Walmart and McDonald's and other big corporations like literally teach their workers how to apply for programs of social assistance, how to apply for food stamps and stuff. I mean, they don't teach them, but they give them a checklist. So they're basically like, yeah, our job is so shitty that you're going to like have to seek all of these like external ways to like make ends meet. So it's
are you kidding me?
no, I'm not joking. Yeah, they like encourage their workers and show them and basically help them apply for social assistance programs because
Oh my
they don't
god.
get paid enough. So I feel like the fact that like I see what you're saying in terms of it might help emancipate the worker to not rely solely on his employer for a wage and a means of subsistence, but I could also see it taking like a really nefarious turn where like the employer is never responsible for the like employees like ability to
Hmm.
survive. And I think
Hmm.
that's like what basic I think that's where universal basic income sort of scares me the most, is like, will it just become a subsidy for really low waged workers, um,
Hmm. Yeah.
for like big corporations to like externalize the cost of their operations even further and like make it
Hmm.
even that much more impossible for their low wage employees to like survive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like that, yeah, what I was talking about was like the progressive dream. But the original idea is actually completely in line with what you're talking about. Like the original idea came from Milton Friedman and Hayek. in the 70s. These
Hmm.
are the engineers of neoliberalism.
Yeah,
Like these are like the fuckheads, you know what I mean? The hyper right wing economists.
totally. Yeah,
Um,
that's the thing. It's like UBI is not a new proposal. Like it's
no.
actually been around for a really, really long time. It's just taken on like different
Mhm.
forms, but
Mhm. Yeah.
like the proposal of UBI, yeah, it's being marketed as this new like technological like dream utopian determinism type of thing, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's been around for a really long time. And like neoliberalism, every time like they money gets pumped into um the working class when it's needed in order to like fuel production and basically like uphold capitalism, but
Mhm.
the second that it's not in the interest of the capitalists anymore, it's torn down, you know, and like
Mhm.
UBI is going
Mhm.
to be the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was designed for the capitalists. Like
Hmm.
they originally called it this a negative income tax, and they were pushing it because they thought that unemployment benefits were holding wages too high. So as in like if an employer was trying to pay really low wages or if they were trying to pay people less than a living wage, people who got unemployment insurance would say like no, it's not in my interest to work for you for this like less than a living wage when I'm actually like the unemployment benefits that I'm getting are actually better than your fucking slave wages. So no. um so in order to get someone to work, you have to pay 50% more than the unemployment benefit to make it worthwhile for them.
Hmm.
So the neoliberals, the economists, the right wingers said, well, why don't we pay the benefit to everyone? And then it would be possible to pay only half of the unemployment wage, like on only half of the unemployment benefit as a wage. So you could still get people coming into work for that.
Hmm.
So the whole scheme was originally thought of as a way to lower the baseline of wages down below the value of unemployment benefits. So,
Yeah,
like, what?
totally. I
You
mean,
know?
that's in line with like we need to remember that the entire quest, like the entire history of capitalism can be reduced to the the goal of producing a working class whose survival is dependent on selling its wage labor for survival. Like that's literally
Yeah.
like
But for the cheapest price.
and for the cheapest price. Like if you I don't know, the idea that capitalists are going to push for a UBI that allows the working class to emancipate themselves fully from the structure of labor when that is like literally what they depend on is unfortunately something I'm very skeptical of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, this is not what it was ever designed for. And so progressives took hold of this and thought, like, well, we could make this really progressive. Like, we
Hmm.
could make it something that emancipates people. But even then, I'll link a video by Paul Cockshott in a blog post where he was trying to calculate like how this would be funded and like how it would actually harm other working people because like, you know, in theory we could get this money by like taxing the shit out of like the billionaires or taxing the shit out of the robots, but like, you know, look how well that's been going this for the past like ever, you know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
not going to happen. So it was like, you know, it's going to actually harm working people who are making moderate to average pay because they're going to be taxed more to fund this so that like it'll basically just like equalize everybody who's like working class into getting like a similar wage, but then like the owner class or the capitalist class is like gonna not be affected.
Right, exactly. I mean, a lot of the proposals for like basic incomes, or a lot of the capital that is being raised by the state to fund potential basic income programs would come from the working class themselves.
Mhm.
So that's like why right wingers are all about it, is they see this as an almost like a self-funding model basically,
Mhm.
where since you force the socially like an economically precarious class to exit from social assistance programs, you can like tax them more and also like get the money from the social assistance program and distribute them as like, you know, a basic
Mhm.
income.
Mhm. Yeah, well, you just hit on something like that's definitely part of these reactionary models that are being put forward by people like Charles Murray and by like the right wing Fraser Institute in Canada, where the idea of basic income isn't that you get a wage on top of your social services that
Mm-hmm.
you're already guaranteed. It's that you get like $10,000 per year or something, which is well below the poverty line, that wouldn't even pay you rent in
Mm-hmm.
Toronto for a year, that would not pay you rent. And then the rest of your services are privatized. So you have to purchase private insurance or everything
Right.
else is on you. So
Right.
instead of being covered, it's like, okay, here's this like terrible wage that you can't live on actually. And then you're on your own.
Exactly. Like, do we really expect that the costs of, healthcare and education and housing wouldn't subsequently rise if everyone was given a basic wage? Because again, like as we just said, capitalists rely on, like, capitalist exploitation relies on the dependency that people have on work in order to buy those goods and services.
Mm-hmm.
So like obviously if they had enough, if they all of a sudden got huge checks in the mail, then yeah, the price of basic necessities would also rise.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, because like if you think about this long term, if we're thinking that people will be continually made superfluous to capital, then the prices wouldn't be able to rise indefinitely. I mean, like economically, I don't see how this is going to work anyway into the future, if we are thinking about this huge displacement of labor. And because then eventually all the working class people, it's like, well, how are you going to tax them? Like they're all just living on their basic income. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. Well, and that I think that's part of the scheme of coercing people back into the labor market, like no matter
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you do.
Yeah, there's a lot of people like who argue that this is really just about maintaining and producing a low wage workforce of people who will accept
Completely.
like shitty jobs.
Right. Like we can't leave capitalists in charge of the means of production, but then hope that miraculously the like DNA of labor markets is going to change.
Yeah. I think this really lays bare the fact that it does not make sense anymore. I mean, it never did, but it doesn't make sense anymore going into the future having a system that's based around a class of owners
Hmm.
and a class of laborers. Like it doesn't make sense to do that because all of the laborers are going to be displaced. Like it doesn't make sense anymore. We
Hmm.
can't just have everybody living on a UBI. Like this is like really fucked up, you know?
Hmm.
And I feel like the World Bank and the IMF are even like musing about basic income. Like,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
when you know that.
the engineers of like austerity and like they've been worrying about the backlash against all of their austerity programs, so this is like a great way to dress up their
Hmm.
agenda as something that looks really progressive, but like
To
it's a
not
myth.
actually change
It's
the
like a myth, just like poverty reduction.
right. Right. Yeah. When I was reading about this morning, I kept thinking like it's this like dystopian fantasy that I think elites are pushing and that also like on the left we're starting to embrace, that as if the economy can remain capitalist and labor systems can go unchanged, but that we can also have socialism coexist with that. Like we can't, those two things are unreconcilable, but I feel like with UBI it almost, there's this like allure in thinking that they're not. Like
Hmm.
it was making me think of how the other week we were talking about people who say like I'm
Oh
fiscally
god.
conservative but socially liberal, like as in like as
Fucking
if that's
hell,
a thing that can exist.
that is not a thing.
It is not a thing. You can't be exactly. You can't like think that you are in favor of a socially progressive agenda while simultaneously endorsing a market that is going like that is going to harm people of color and women and disabled people and
Right,
like,
right.
you know, and all those marginalized communities first, you know? And I feel
I'm
like,
like getting so riled up even just hearing that.
yeah,
Like I could talk for hours about how fucked up that is and how like this is just totally an aside, but like when I told Maureen that people in Canada actually identify that way, she was just blown away. She was like, "What? I thought that was like a joke." I was like, "No, there are people in Canada that I know, like good friends of mine who are smart people. Like it's normal for people to say, "Oh, I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative." I'm like, "What the fuck are you saying?" Like, God.
yeah. I mean, I guess that doesn't fully surprise me, but you know, like that line is such a, I feel like it's been disproven so much, or like I didn't know that people actually said that, you know? It's kind of like the line like, well, black people aren't oppressed anymore, Obama was president. Like you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
actually think people say that, you know?
yeah.
But sometimes every once in a while I do hear that and I'm like, wait,
They
what?
do.
Really? Like people people bringing up that argument as if it's like a novel thing that they thought of.
Yeah,
Like this is
yeah,
a really good point, you know, that I'm going to
yeah.
make.
Exactly, right? Well, I'm a good guy because I'm socially liberal,
Right.
but fiscally conservative because we know we need to be responsible for the
Right.
future generations. I was like, what the fuck? Like, what are you
Exactly.
talking
Yeah,
about?
of course I want to endorse social change, but like I'm also
Yeah,
economically actually like I know what's up.
right, exactly.
Capitalism is the most unrealistic, unrational idea, you know?
Yeah. No, I read the
Like,
newspaper, so I
right,
know what's going on with the economy.
right. Like stop with the fact that we can't have a system based on infinite growth. Like I don't understand
Yeah,
how like you can even
yeah.
argue two lines past that blatant contradiction of capitalism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And exactly what you were saying to bring it back to this, that like, yeah, people just have this vision that like we can just ignore the contradictions of capitalism and
Mhm.
then just create this system where we just pay everyone somehow to live in poverty.
Right.
Like like
Right.
great, that sounds great.
Mhm. I think that a lot of people think, and it's really tempting, um, to think that UBI would create the conditions for a stronger working class to fight back.
Mhm.
But we have to achieve the stronger working class first, like before UBI. Like I don't think UBI as being distributed and owned by the capitalist class that has so much power and that owns all the means of production
Mhm.
is ever going to, I'm sorry. I don't know if that made sense, but you know what I mean. Like a UBI that's
Mhm.
distributed by those people isn't in turn going to create a stronger working class to then fight back
Mhm.
against them. Like the stronger working class and the struggle to emancipate yourself like needs to come before UBI. Like I'm not saying that UBI doesn't like is not going to be a part of it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that UBI, as it's structured right now under capitalism, just will not have that potential.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, just thinking about where it came from and like what it was designed for, it's terrifying. And if
Right.
if it's not something that's going to give a wage that's above the poverty line and it gives you access to social services that you need, then it's not going to help. And then like as you're talking about like worker power, what about people who are out of work? Like they're just completely superfluous to capitalist systems. So they're not workers anymore. So what bargaining power do they have at all? They're just sitting
Yeah.
there living on their basic income. They don't have any fucking bargaining power. Bargaining power with who? They're just
Yeah.
like low
That's
wage consumers and they don't even have much money to consume with. So no, who cares about them, you know?
That's such a good point because as much as, you know, I wish we didn't have to work and I think that work is bullshit, obviously.
Mhm.
I do think that, you know, capitalists, what they, you know, they're afraid of the bargaining power of the workers. So would UBI like would it actually strip us of the one thing that
Mhm. Yeah.
that really low wage workers do have?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
I hadn't
then you're
even
just
thought of
sitting
that.
there waiting for handouts, and if they dry up, what the fuck are you gonna do? You know what I
Right.
mean? I don't know. I just yeah, the whole thing is like extremely scary to me, and
Mhm.
I don't understand why we haven't already woken up, but like I also don't understand why this isn't making people wake up even more. Like people are actually like, "Yay, UBI." And I mean, there are conservatives who are against UBI, not for these reasons that we're giving here, but because they're just against, like they just think it's like it's too socialist, it's like a left wing, like it's going to be too expensive and like whatever, right? And it's
Hmm.
just like wow, like there's even people who aren't even at least on the side that like, well, this is going to be necessary, but we don't really like it. Like there are still people who believe so much in the capitalist system that like they're opposing this for like incredibly reactionary reasons, even though this at its core is a reactionary idea.
Hmm.
I don't know, it just blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think that what is important, if people are going to walk away with anything from this episode, it's to understand that UBI is diverse, and it has like a lot of different potentials and a lot of different ways of being implemented. A lot of the conversations that go on around like universal basic income are very conceptual, but
Mhm.
I think, you know, the political struggle in implementing basic income and in constantly defending the new rights, because the capitalists are going to in turn, you know, raise the prices or like keep people precarious in other ways, in order to offset the benefits of basic income. So it definitely, you know, if it were to work, there would have to also be a constant and like ferocious continual fight to
Mhm.
like yield the benefits of basic income. Like it's not just like this band-aid that we can just apply and keep reaping the benefits from. It's like,
Mhm.
as we've seen from like more Keynesian economics during the post-war era, like even periods that are characterized by like an increase in social benefits and better conditions for people, like they're only temporary, you know, they're only
Mhm.
there while they benefit the capitalists and allow like the system to maintain itself and to like grow in strength. So I don't know, we would just have to be really, really careful and acutely aware that the political struggle behind like basic income, if we want to keep it radical, is going to have to be like fucking,
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
relentless.
But that's why it's so scary that these people wouldn't actually be workers anymore, because it's like what kind of like radical pressure can just unemployed people put on? Like they could ride in the streets and stuff like that, but like, you
Yeah.
know, I don't
No,
know.
that's like that's really true. That's like not even a point that I had thought about. Um but yeah, we can already see in different basic income programs that have been implemented around the world, in Finland or in India or in Canada, like all of those, all those pilot projects for basic income are like wildly different and have yielded very different outcomes. Like some have been successful and some haven't. Um, Notably in Finland, apparently the experiment was like a basically a tragic failure, and their system of like social assistance, of their like state based social assistance program, was more successful.
Mhm.
I just worry that it's like this like flashy performative program for states to act like they really do want to lift people out of poverty.
Mhm.
So to like implement these pilot programs, but really like if the point is to show that poor people on welfare just need more money in order to be healthy and happy and successful, like we already know
Mhm.
that. Like we just
Mhm.
we don't need, like is it just a way for to like for them to avoid taking concrete actions to actually implement meaningful redistributive policies?
Mhm.
Is it just a way for them to like avoid doing that whilst also creating basically the foundation for like a very eroded like social welfare state where in the future they're just going to subsidize low wage employees
Mhm. Yeah,
and
no,
compensate for
definitely.
the fact that like work is in like horribly precarious.
Mhm. Yeah, because it's like again, like it can kind of go both ways, because on some level the idea of basic income is kind of like, oh, this is novel because this is a no strings attached kind of a thing, where it's
Right.
like we don't like stipulate how you use this at all, you just get it, you can use it forever for whatever you want. So in some ways it's like, oh, how liberating, but then it's also like Yeah, but then that's just like advances this hyper neoliberal individualized privatized kind of a system where it's like okay, and then again, yeah, if you're not working or if you're working really low wage work, then it's like you don't have power. Like if you can't afford things, it's like, well, you can't afford them.
Right.
Like you
Is
know.
it a bullshit way to push this narrative? Like, you have freedom to choose again, but it's like,
Right,
freedom to choose
exactly.
what? Like, if I'm sorry, but if your healthcare, if your education, it's costing you like 90% of your basic income,
Hmm.
what is it really great that you can choose between like two different companies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like for people who are already making really low money, it's like this basic income. I don't know how you'd even pay rent. It's like I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another problem that I have with it, or that people have with it, or that I would like to bring up, is that this so far we're only talking about providing basic income for citizens. So what about immigrants? What about refugees? You
Yeah.
know? Like all of these people, the predominant driver of migration continues to be like imperialism induced poverty and war, also tied to imperialism. So like growing income inequality fueled by neoliberal capitalism, fueled by the Western powers and like North America. These are driving people away from their homes and, needing refuge or needing, jobs or like a different place to live. Also, climate change, which we are fueling so heavily in the West, is creating a number of environmental refugees, and that is only slated to increase wildly as time goes on. So, like immigration systems in the West are designed to control migrants and force them to work in precarious conditions for low pay with very few legal protections. And this just seems like it's going to be the same. It's like, okay, so fine, you're a refugee here, but you don't get the basic income. So it's like considering basic income is designed to lower unemployment benefits and like lower wages overall. Like what about people who can't access the basic income? Then it's
Mm-hmm.
like they have no chance of living because everyone else is getting the basic income, wages are decreasing because companies are being subsidized to do that. Unemployment benefits are decreasing because, well, everyone's getting this basic income. So what the like no, I don't see anyone really talking about what's going to happen for immigrants or like refugees or like migrants.
Completely. Yeah, I mean, as a person like living in Europe and seeing the refugee crisis here, like I am so worried. Like, is it just going to uphold, yeah, like European imperialism and also robust kind of our fortress of like European privilege that
Mhm.
other people aren't? Because I mean, politicians talking about this are definitely like every single one up until now, without exception, has said, if they've considered basic income, they've always stated that it would be on the basis of like, only for their citizens. Like, there's no
Mhm.
way that politicians would support basic income for whoever comes to
Mhm.
the country and isn't a citizen. So is it just going to solidify a system where like certain people who are privileged enough to be like citizens of the state that they reside in read the benefits, but the others don't? Like, for example, in the debates over the Swiss program, Lucy Stamm, a member of parliament for the right-wing Swiss People's Party, said he could imagine supporting UBI, but only for the Swiss. I quote, theoretically, if Switzerland were an island, the answer is yes, he said at the time. But with open borders, it's a total impossibility, especially for Switzerland with a high living standard.
Mhm.
And again, like nothing about that is surprising to me. Like, I don't
Yeah.
already, and
Yeah.
I feel like there's so much social outrage. Like, I'll talk for France, but just the line of thinking, I mean, and for the US too, right, that the immigrants are coming in and stealing our jobs.
Mhm.
But France, which is
Canada
supposed to
too.
have, yeah, which is supposed to have like a good social welfare program, like that is literally all you hear out of the mouths of French conservatives, is like that the people are just like coming to vacation here basically to take advantage of our social programs. So like all this talk of UBI, especially UBI that's supported by right wingers, like,
Hmm.
how can we imagine that it's going to be anything else than a capitalist scheme and also an imperialist one that the global south is not going to benefit from?
That's what I was thinking. I was like, well, not every country is going to be able to afford UBI. So
Right.
what happens to them? So like all the wealthy Western countries are giving UBI to everybody, and then like what happens to the rest of the globe? Like what's that going to do to the global economy?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
It scares me.
Hmm.
It just all of this really
I feel
fucking
like it's
scares
going to
me.
give an even larger and more unfair comparative advantage to like all Western countries, if that is
Yeah,
even possible at
absolutely.
this point.
Absolutely. Especially if the like because the Western companies are the ones that are basically operating in all of these the global south, like all these countries.
Right.
And so if the those companies automate all of theirs, like if they automate all of the like sweatshop jobs and then all those sweatshop workers are out of work, like after suffering like how many years of like neocolonial exploitation, etc. So now they're out of work and their country can't afford UBI. And the
Right.
global economy is now such that they're totally superfluous.
Right.
And they've already been super exploited through colonialism, imperialism, and then neoliberal capitalism. So
And
what the fuck happens to them?
yeah, exactly. And I'm worried that companies that are able, like bigger companies, right, that are able to pay for all this machinery and that automate all of their costs of production. So like that will work for a while, but then there's inevitably going to be like other like maybe smaller, more flexible companies that spring up that come to like recuperate that incredibly like exploitable labor force
Mm-hmm.
to compete with the companies that are automated. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it's not like those people are just then just going to be like chilling or something. Like they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be exploited by someone else because it's not like yeah, the right now how UBI is being discussed and automation too, it's not actually taking into account any of those social relations or the way that the capitalist markets are structured. So it's still
Mm-hmm.
like we're still
Mm-hmm.
gonna yeah, still gonna
Yeah,
find ourselves
it's
in the same
totally like
situation.
ignorant to power and how power operates and how our global economy has always operated.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, this doesn't solve capitalism's internal contradictions. This actually like makes hyper visible that this entire global system is ridiculous,
Mhm.
you know? And like all these countries that have been exploited and, you know, they've turned away from subsistence or they've turned away from creating things for themselves. And so like, you know, their agricultural production is like purely cash crops for export. So like how are they like none of this
Mhm.
makes sense. And overaccumulation will still happen. And
Mhm.
the environment will like if we're living in a for-profit system, like if it's a for-profit growth oriented system, then environmental destruction will still happen. And so like the two major contradictions of capitalism are overaccumulation and environmental degradation.
Mhm.
So both of those will still happen. It's not going to be solved at all.
Mhm.
So what the fuck?
Yeah, it's not changing the modes of production, but it's saying, you know, since like the working class is so devoid of means to buy the shit that we produce, we're gonna like artificially pump money so that they can keep purchasing this stuff, right? But
Mhm.
it absolutely isn't solving the problem of the way that the economic structure is designed for infinite growth. And especially as you said, like the environmental problem, like we're still so basically we're saying, okay, well, UBI can be a way to keep keep fueling production for production's sake and consumption for
Yes.
consumption's sake. And like we recognize that no one actually like needs this shit and it's totally unsustainable.
Mhm.
Um but somehow so many of these conversations around UBI are not acknowledging the fact that we're still using it as like a band-aid to further like just
This
this
pointlessness.
pointlessness. Exactly.
Oh my God, yeah, you're right. This is just like trying to make us continue production and consumption for their own sake, for no other fucking purpose.
Like
Like,
no other fucking purpose.
no other fucking purpose. Because we know that true freedom means having like 25 choices in terms of what bread we're gonna eat or what chocolate bars we have. That's freedom. We need to keep that going.
Totally. And like our lives are still going to revolve around like prices, and we're still
Yeah,
going to be limited by like what we can and can't afford, what we can and cannot do based on
right.
the economic means that we have. Like it's not actually altering any of those
No.
paradigms.
And it makes me so mad because we could be living in like a post scarcity kind of society. Like, we could be living in such a way where we don't overexploit our resources and we produce just for need and we distribute it to everyone. And that's great. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah. This is still not a system that is going to be like goods are still not going to be distributed on the basis of need. They're going to be
hmm
distributed and like allocated on the basis of profit. So
hmm and like it won't even work. Like, we can't have infinite growth with everyone displaced from the workforce. We can't. Like, it doesn't make sense. And like the libertarian capitalist argument for capitalism is that it allocates resources efficiently in this, context of scarcity that we're in. Like, but that's under like a perfectly competitive model. So if we're having everybody just living on UBI, that doesn't make sense anymore. None of
no,
this makes sense anymore.
no.
I really hate all these ridiculous arguments for capitalism. It's just like, well, look at where it heads, though. Like, follow it to its end here,
Right.
because like that doesn't work.
Yeah. No, it really is like this diluted fantasy that capitalism is based on the exploitation of people, but that somehow we think that with a universal basic income, like it's going to reverse that truth, but not actually like that they're going to be compatible in some kind of way. Like as if the
hmm
ownership class is going to give the means to the workers to go on like permanent strike against them and like exit
Right.
from the labor force. Like that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's going to be a huge confusing mess of a dumpster fire where we're just like, people are just grasping on to ropes trying to be like, okay, like maybe if we do this we can hold on longer. It's like, why are we holding on?
Right.
Like, stop. Just stop.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, the question isn't like where we know where we want to get, right? We want to get to a point where everyone has like means of subsistence and can like be free and everything.
hmm
But the
hmm
but like UBI is not like UBI is only makes sense if it's the means to that end. It doesn't make sense if it's the end in itself.
hmm Absolutely. No, that's a really great point, because in the end here, even though I've been critiquing it
I know. I was gonna say we're getting
harshly, this
so negative. Like
yeah, I know.
we're gonna have a balanced episode of the pros and cons.
Yeah,
Like flash forward
yeah.
like an hour into the episode, we're just like, this makes me so fucking mad.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. Oh god.
Anyway, even though I've been like coming down pretty
Yeah,
hard on this,
let's talk about the good parts.
well, I wasn't even going to talk about the good parts. Actually, I was just going to say that I think UBI is necessary, but I think it's necessary like as capitalism circles the drain, basically. Like, I think that we should be supportive of it, or like at the very least we should not outright oppose it.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
but I mean, as it's being implemented, we need to be hyper vigilant about how it's being implemented, and if they're going to strip away our other social services, and if they're going to like, use this as a way to lower wages overall. Um, so we have to fight for that, but also this is just a short-term band-aid solution. Like, this is not something that we can like this is not a way that we can maintain this infinite growth and have this class of owners and this class of laborers. It no longer makes sense, and I fear that like we're just going to use this as a way, like as this last ditch attempt to hold on as long as we can, when this is ridiculous. Like, so it's like, yeah, I mean, support it because people need it. Like, people are fucking gonna need it.
Hmm.
But also it's like we have to educate people on capitalism and the contradictions of capitalism, and have them understand like what's the end game here, like how, like, think into the future. Like, we need fully automated luxury communism. Like,
Hmm.
we need that. We need automation to work for everyone, and to like produce things based on need, not like super exploitation of our resources, not growth, not profit, not any of this shit. So it can't be where we stop. Like this can't be like our what we're aiming for. This has to be like a means to a different end, and we all have to be aware of what that different end is
Mm-hmm.
and like what we have to do for it. So
Yeah,
anyway.
totally. No, really well said. I was thinking while you were speaking, I was like, is this actually just like a modern, like new age form of like of debt? You know what I mean? Because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, you know, even on the state level, like so many states are basically like enslaved to capitalism, colonialism by being in this like imaginary debt that like keeps
Mm-hmm.
rising, like the interest keeps rising and they keep having to pay it back. But even like how the state indebts its citizen to basically like enslave them, you know, like if when you have like a lot of debt because of like education or because of I don't know, the fact that all the banks keep issuing like credit cards so that people keep pumping money into the economy and keep spending, like ultimately just ties them back to the capitalist structure.
Mm-hmm.
And is it like because maybe people are catching on to the fact that that's how debt works, that now they're like, oh, we are going to disguise it as like a universal basic income?
Mm-hmm.
um but also, yeah, and especially I feel like it's especially dangerous because, as you said, it like strips us of like our one remaining bargaining power of like labor. So it's like
Exactly.
we're really going to be reliant on the state for these, you know, quote unquote
Everything.
handouts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, no, everything.
And that's what scares me because it's like, unless we are already thinking of UBI as a means to a different end, like, unless we're already organizing now for that, then by the time we're all living off UBI, we're not going to have any like revolutionary power.
Yeah,
We're going to be totally
totally.
disenfranchised. And so it's
Yeah,
going to just be like, you know, this could be like the most dystopian fucking horror show ever, or it could
totally.
be like
Yeah.
a glowing utopia of wonder and like fairness and equality for all. But
Mhm.
like, you know, obviously none of our like even like liberal governments, quote unquote the liberal government, like these are all neoliberals. Like these
Right.
are all neoliberal capitalist governments.
Mhm.
So we can't let them do this.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the capitalist state is always trying to create the conditions for capital accumulation. That's like its number one function. So it's not so thinking that it's going to have some big redistributive role that is going to fundamentally alter like the very power structure that it relies on is, I think, unrealistic.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm forgetting who said this, but that the state is the executive committee of the bourgeoisie,
Hmm.
like at least the state in its modern form, um,
Yeah.
which is like so true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the capitalist state has no interest in creating a classless utopia.
No, no, they don't. And I feel like the first thing to go in that case would be like borders. Yeah,
Hmm.
if their goal was really to create like a global utopia or like a quote unquote universal basic income, as we said, the basic income wouldn't be reliant on whether or not you are a citizen of that state.
Hmm. Yeah, no, definitely.
I think that all in all, like for me, what is promising or what is good about like all these conversations around universal basic income, and especially if the left like gets serious about all the things that we addressed, is that it like ideologically, I still feel like these conversations or it has the potential to raise the expectations of workers, like to start conversations around the fact that like human life isn't just valuable because of like a person's ability to perform labor,
Hmm. Yeah.
and that things like food and shelter and education, those social services aren't things that you should have to work in order to benefit from, like they should be
Hmm.
basic
Hmm.
human rights. And
Yeah.
I think that the universal basic income, like if it has the potential to bring that into the forefront of people's like consciousness,
Hmm.
it can potentially like radicalize people's imaginations in a way that would go against the capitalist state.
Mm-hmm.
Again, though, like that movement needs to come from the bottom up. Like if it's just pushed by like
Mark Zuckerberg.
exactly, and like Elon Musk just out of the goodness of their own heart, just like since they're so innovative and brilliant, like
Mm-hmm.
handing out payouts to people, it's not going to have that potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I think that's true because um like prior to now, the idea was that the reason why it was fair for people to have to pay for those things themselves was because everyone assumed that capitalism was the super efficient system and that if you only worked hard enough, then you would make it and then you'd be able to do it if you were responsible enough. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that now this actually really demonstrates to people that no, that's not true. Capitalism is a fucking shit show. It always has been. It's always been unequal. It's always been ridiculous. And the idea of like just working hard and then you'll be fine doesn't hold up anymore, especially if like 50% of the population is redundant to the workforce. And so you're right, that could actually change people's minds about like, well, people who are redundant to the workforce are still people that still need to be taken care of and that deserve that and that, so yeah, I mean
Mm-hmm.
that could definitely shift people's thinking on that ridiculously like bourgeois individualist
Mm-hmm.
ideology.
Mm-hmm. Like, is it actually a radical proposal to help us emancipate ourselves from capitalism and labor, or is it really just like a really meager concession pushed by capitalists to basically prop up the system and like allow them to keep exploiting people on the basis of like class and
Mhm.
nation and race and all
Yeah,
that?
well, I mean, I think the majority of people pushing it fall into that camp. But I think that, as you said, if it can open up the minds of like the quote unquote 99% to actually realize that, these conservative ideas about work and value and like, you know, services and who deserves them and whatever, like if it can actually open up people's minds about that, then maybe we're talking like then maybe we're talking about people actually wanting to come together and create, this luxury communism.
Mm-hmm.
you know so I don't know. I mean, I just want people to be aware of this stuff when they're talking about it.
Right. Well, we ended up being a lot more negative than I even thought that we could on this topic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, kind of expected it to go this way, to
I
be
did too.
honest.
I did too. Yeah.
So, thanks for listening, and I hope this, I don't know, shook some things up in your mind or made you think a bit differently about our system as a whole and like the
Right.
the big picture and the end game here.
And I'd be super interested to hear from anyone who might have answers to all the questions that we've brought up.
Yeah.
For the most part, like yes, some people do bring this stuff up or like, but I feel like it's always addressed by saying like, okay, well, we're gonna need like strict policy changes in order to like make it go the right way. But there's not actually like we
Mm-hmm.
need like an actual blueprint for how universal basic income is going to play out because as I said, like as we acknowledge like there's so many different ways that it can be implemented and also it could be like a tragic loss of the tiny bargaining power that we still have left
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, by relying on our employer for labor.
Yeah, and even if you have a blueprint though, like still, what's the end game? Like
Exactly.
think about 50, 100 years down the line. Like what's the fucking end game of this? Because we can't just live on this forever. It doesn't make
And like
sense
keep
anymore.
producing shit just for the
For
sake
no
of producing
reason.
it for no
Yeah.
reason.
So, yeah, I'd be definitely interested to hear if people have like really progressive ideas about it. Anyway,
Anyway, thank you for listening.
yeah, and leave us your comments as
Yeah,
usual.
we'd love some feedback. I would
Yeah.
be super interested to hear what people have to say about this episode.
Mm-hmm. Me too. And if you like it, please share it with your friends so that we can get the word out that there are things that we need to be thinking about more deeply.
Yes.
Yes. All right.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Already know. Cheers.